You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, welcome back to the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Barnbrecht, covering the Nets and also the New York Football Giants over on the One Giant podcast. And that's Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR, all your daily fantasy needs from MLB winding down, NFL just starting, and of course, the NBA just around the corner. But that's not why we're here, Doug. We're here to talk Brooklyn Nets basketball. And the topic that I think you we're not here for anything other than the Brooklyn Nets, though it's good to know what we're doing in our spare time. What we are here, though, is to talk about the thing that you and I both agreed we weren't going to be able to get away from, even if we prefer that we could, as the season approaches, training camp approaches, and the discussions around the NBA and specifically the Nets and Kyrie Irving and vaccinations continues to be a topic of conversation, with now another article coming out from a major publication at that, which is why we felt we need to dive into it here on a Monday.
Yeah. I hope this is your first listen of the week on the podcast, because we're getting into the vaccination talk right away. Yeah, so we try to avoid this because we were sort of hoping it would be a non-issue, and I'm going to be very clear before we even get into this. Adam and I are not going to give our thoughts on vaccines in this thing. Some other people on the network have. It's just not what we're going to do. I'm going to try to, in this case, be a reporter instead of a opinionator around medical stuff. This is a basketball podcast. Point stop. And that's, I think I speak for Adam and I when I say that. So over the weekend, I mentioned on last Friday's episode in the opening that that word had come out that Kyrie Irving was one of the Nets that had not been vaccinated leading into the season. And I mentioned that we would start, because we had already recorded the podcast prior to that news, and it was in the can. And your boys going into the weekend aren't going to go back and redo it. not around something like this.
That's a one and done, friends.
Yeah, once the recording stops, the world, a meteor could hit the earth in some other place. We're not going to and hit Barclays Center. We're not jumping on to re-record. So so what happens is it comes out originally that Kyrie Irving was one of the folks that was not vaccinated. We'll get to why that's important in a second from a basketball perspective. And then a lengthy piece on Rolling Stone was published as well from Matt Sullivan, who had written a book about the Nets in the offseason. I don't remember the name of it. Don't really, frankly, care what the name of it is. But I know that he did that. And this piece detailed why Kyrie Irving was not vaccinated. Did not quote Kyrie Irving, mind you. Did not really even quote anyone in his inner circle, mind you, outside of his of an aunt of his, who Sullivan claims is in his inner circle, and I don't know Kyrie Irving's family well enough to know that that's true or not. And then goes on to detail. Look, I'm just going to say this. Adam, I'm going to leave you out of this. You can feel free to disagree with me or not on this one. The Rolling Stone article is trash. It actually doesn't even matter how you feel about vaccines. It's not reporting. It's an op-ed disguised as reporting, and it goes to detail. It's a lot of conjecture, and it's a lot of subtleties around the opinion of the author, with the backdrop of it being how it could affect the NBA season, but not really, because it's mostly just about the author's opinion on the issue. And that's kind of where we are as we lead into Nets Media Day, because you're probably listening to this as Nets Media Day might even be going on, because it's going on Monday afternoon. And it just opens the season with this sort of, I don't even want to call it a cloud, because I'm not even sure that's what it is. This other piece of talking point that maybe it's avoidable, maybe it's not, but kind of just this is where we are in terms of the Kyrie Irving, the way we start the season with him.
Yeah, I mean, and this feels true of the way everything with Kyrie Irving works. It's just, if it involves Kyrie Irving, it doesn't matter what the topic is, doesn't matter what you're trying to figure out. It just becomes about conjecture and speculation, and then drawing conclusions. And then based on the conclusions from the conjectures and speculation, we're now going to make a definitive idea about what we think this person is doing or not doing, again, around anything, vaccines or otherwise. Quickly, I agree with you 100% as far as what this article felt like to me and what it read like to me. You and I were texting a little bit before we got on. And Matt Sullivan, by the way, that book of his also had a lot of the same kind of themes as far as a lot of conjecture and not necessarily a lot of things that were grounded in what I'll say journalism, right? Real reporting around something. And it's fine to have a opinion about what you think is going on. It's far different to present it as hard-hitting facts and information around something when you don't necessarily know it to be true. And we're going to get into just what it means, vaccinated or not vaccinated, as far as how it impacts the next season. But just from an information standpoint, like this is what happened last week when some of the stuff was going around Twitter. Like this feels Twitter adjacent, because rather than media days tomorrow, like after the press conference from Sean Marks and Steve Nash, random people drew random conclusions and started to speculate about things. Now this comes out and it's like random conclusions and speculation. Try to figure out something when you're not really sure about it. Media day is going to come tomorrow, and presumably Kyrie will speak there. And when he does, we'll get real information. It'll be what he's telling us about it. And then I'll draw my conclusion. So any of these things could end up being true. I've also, I know you're the same way, Doug. It's like, I'm also someone who doesn't mind waiting to know that the information is factually based and not just saying, hey, what if? And then allowing people to kind of take that and run with it. And it creates such a, I don't know, dude, like it creates such a circus around any topic of conversation rather than it maybe being a lot more straightforward, which I think this could be as well.
Yeah, so I'll weigh in on that. So there's two things about this. One, if you've listened to this podcast for a while, especially when we went through this with, you and Adam and I were not ourselves going through anything. When we were talking about this last year when Kyrie sat out, we have been often of the opinion that from a media perspective, Kyrie is a hot button topic who sometimes also doesn't totally help himself when it
100%.
comes to this stuff, whether he wants to or not. I don't believe he wants to, so I don't think that it's from his perspective either here nor there. Just from sort of a fan perspective, the messaging out of his camp sometimes, or him specifically, does sometimes tend to fan the flames rather than abate them. And so I think that that's a fair thing to say. I think that there's no bigger Kyrie Irving fans than Adam and I. And so I'm not really taking a dig at him as much as I'm saying when it comes to this stuff, it's sort of easy to go after him, because I think at times I'm like, ooh, I don't know about that message, or that one's going to, track more flies with honey than whatever the other part of that saying is. So I don't think he necessarily sort of helps himself from a media narrative. Again, I actually don't think he cares all the time about it, or he wants to, or that's a piece of what he's sort of going after, or just like the messaging that he likes to put out there. He's just his own dude, and that's just how he goes about it. And it doesn't necessarily always conform to what the typical NBA player or even athlete does in terms of sort of how they approach the media and whatnot. So in that way, I think sometimes he invites it, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, and then it becomes sort of, I'm holding up my quotes for the YouTube audience, easy to kind of go after him in this respect and probably preach to whatever readership you think is going to applaud you for writing something like this, because it's like, again, it's really so slanted that it's hard to even talk about. But I'm not getting into the X's and O's of like why the vaccine is important from a basketball perspective, but just from a Kyrie Irving perspective, I kind of see why this stuff happens. And I'm actually not sure it even gets cleared up for media day. Maybe that take will be, will look bad in retrospect too, but it's kind of just more of the same around sometimes the stuff that kind of comes up around him.
Yeah, no, and I think that that's fair. But in the old two wrongs don't make a right, like just because an athlete or personality isn't as forthcoming or direct or, as cordial and allowing for a two-way kind of relationship with the media, I can appreciate that. And you wish that he was more accessible. I don't know if that then turns around and justifies being like, so my approach to covering this player is going to be primarily looking for the undercut angle, right? And I'm not putting this solely on Matt Sullivan or any one individual, but I can appreciate what you're speaking to, because it goes back to last year, right? When Kyrie's not around the team, all we are is left to wonder. I think that there is a very fine line between being left to wonder and offering the information you have available to you and saying, hey, these are the different things that this could potentially mean. We're not sure yet, and being direct and upfront about that, as opposed to saying, here's one of the 5 things it could mean. And if it means that, then here's the way I would feel about it. And that's, again, it's the less sexy approach, I think, to covering a team or to doing a podcast, as you and I often acknowledge. But that also feels like, at least for me and for you as well, that feels like the honest way to do it, or it feels like the way to do it. I'll use a term that Courtney uses a lot in her work, like to show up with integrity around something. That to me is having integrity around it, and not just running with what I think is going to sensationalize or entertain people and get clicks or views or reads, whatever it may be, as opposed to the long view of there can be a lot of layers to any given topic, and it's okay to wait until you have all that information. I know that's not fun, but that's my approach to it anyway.
And last thing, and then we won't change the subject. We'll just kind of get into what to expect from media day. But I don't even begrudge all the time folks going for clicks and stuff like that. Look, I've been paid in my life to write stuff that is like, it is what it is, right? Like, this is just kind of what happens sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
All I'm saying is, from a reactionary standpoint, you as a reader can also see it for what it is also, right? Like, you can look at something and say,
responsible too. Yeah.
What's that? You can just look at something and say, hey,
are responsible to say, now, how am I absorbing it? Right.
Of course. Like, I'm not begrudging the author for even writing it. I'm saying how I take it in. Right. I'm saying, like, that's what I'm saying. And that's where I want to make sure there's a distinction. Write what you want to write. But as a reader, know where it's coming from here. Right. Like, that's what you should, like, read in between the lines about what a message is and decide for yourself. Hey, what is this author trying to tell me about this situation? Do you think this is a fair and unbiased look at this situation? I would say it's not. He might also say it's not. Right. Like, and that's because he has very strong opinions about the situation. That would be likely the case. Frankly, if they didn't say that, it would be surprising. Anyway, so we'll get into what some of this also means from a basketball perspective. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at Sleeper Fantasy Basketball, gearing up. You know that if you've been playing season-long fantasy basketball, to some degree fantasy football as well, it can kind of feel a little bit broken, because especially if you're playing in a league where you can stream in players all the time, you can just end up losing to your opponent, who ends up being in front of the computer all day and just knows how to get every single guy into a lineup every single day. Sleeper has figured this stuff out. It's a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's a game pick. It's only available on Sleeper. Owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count toward their team's total score. It ensures an even number of games played between opponents. They cracked the fantasy basketball code. You have to download the Sleeper app. Start a league with your friends today. You won't be disappointed. It's a one-of-a-kind game pick. It's the most strategic fantasy basketball experience out there in the industry. Very slick app, very easy to use. Download the Sleeper app now. You won't be disappointed. Sleeper app, download it today.
And of course, I know this sounds familiar to a lot of our listeners out there. You got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows. You're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you're begging Doug Norrie, please give me the access codes to the streaming service so I can watch my favorite TV shows. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called Direct TV Stream, and it brings all your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, so you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no more need to buy another device ever again. And the best part? There's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package.
So from a basketball perspective, I want your opinion on this, because the vaccine piece, and here's where it becomes not really a debate about the current situation. It's just simply the logistics around where we are now with the situation. This involves any player that has not had, that has not, shown that they have had at least the first round of the vaccine. Well, maybe it actually takes both rounds at this point. Do you think this ends up becoming a basketball issue? Again, we're recording this before media day. Maybe it's all figured out. We know that non-vaccinated players cannot at this point play basketball. If you are on the Brooklyn Nets or unvaccinated, you cannot play in New York City. That is the rule. Visiting players can play. Okay, so we already discussed in the past why this is makes weird to no sense, but whatever. Do you think we are in a situation now where the Nets are going to go into opening night, or preseason, or whatever it's going to end up being? Like, do you think that Sean Marks, when they discussed this at the press conference last week, and this was brought up, and it was said something about who had the vaccine and not? Do you think this is something that they have a plan for and kind of know what it is, or this is sort of like we're in another wild card kind of situation here?
Again, I hate to reflect back on last year and Kyrie being away from the team, but that's a recent example. We can say about whether or not Sean Marks and Steve Nash liked it and the way things were handled and the communication there, but we didn't get a lot of information back then. And what we did hear outwardly was, we're okay with it. He'll be back when he's back, and we'll move forward from there. So from that standpoint, going back to the press conference, I think that there's at least an understanding internally inside the Brooklyn Nets building. Whatever is going to happen, they're aware of it. They may not be telling us that they've been aware of it, but they know what it's going to look like to start the season. I don't think that I wouldn't anticipate this being a surprise for the Brooklyn Nets. I'll put it that way. Now, does that mean that they like it if it comes to pass that Kyrie is not going to be able to start the season with the team, or he's not going to be able to be at the home games to start the season? Of course, they're not going to like that. Will there be a push come to shove on that scenario? I don't know, but I'd be really surprised if the Brooklyn Nets were blindsided by this information, because it would just go against everything that we've kind of been speaking to and that we've seen from the last handful of years of just having a clear understanding and communication with their players, where regardless kind of what outside media or what outside people may speculate on, we know it, we'll deal with it, and we'll move forward as we see fit. I have to assume that that's the way the Nets organization looks at this.
Look, we got off Friday's podcast saying the Nets were the most stable organization in basketball. I still stand by this. This kind of news and stuff like that does not dissuade me from thinking that. This is a single player sort of topic right now. The Nets have always been very good about messaging around this stuff, whether it's unpopular or not. They've been very good about sticking up for the side of the player, at least publicly. Who knows what goes on behind closed doors, but that's really neither here nor there. In public, they've always been proponents of the player first and foremost, even when, like you said, likely they wish the situation was not occurring in the way that it was occurring. Like my guess is, go ahead.
No, do you, maybe this is a layup kind of question for you, but like, do you think that
I like layups?
That's my favorite kind.
Preferred shot.
It's my only shot. Do you
Fair.
think that that Kevin Durant, that James Harden, do you wonder about how the relationship between those players and between this team overall, how this potentially impacts how they look at it going into the season? We understand that these guys are friends first off the court. This is not an apples to apples of DeAndre Jordan and just saying, hey, it's time to move on. You're not the best fit for us and wanting to win a championship. But do you think there's anything to that? Because we've talked about Kevin Durant obviously being the clear alpha on this team, and then the role that James Harden took on when he came over. I don't want to ask you to speculate on something, but do you think that that could also be a tension point there too? When you talk about guys that are saying, hey, we're here in Brooklyn together to win a championship. If there is substance to this potentially being an issue, could that be a problem beyond the choice Kyrie's making, and more about Kevin Durant and James Harden saying like, hey, we want to win games here. Like we want to be out there playing. We saw what Kevin Durant was willing to do down the stretch of the season. And then in the Olympics with Team USA, can there be a strain there, I guess? And you can just say, man, that's way too speculative for you to get into.
Well, I mean, it's too speculative for me to know what the personal relationships are. So I think that goes without saying. But I will say one thing that was interesting about this Rolling Stone article, if you read between these lines, is at no point was a current player quoted or sourced as being at the center in this kind of decision. In fact, the players that did speak about it, Grant Williams and Jonathan Isaac, I can't tell if they were quoted for the article or they were just kind of picked up like shrapnel quotes from other things. Though, whether they were on either side of the aisle with the issue, they were still supportive of the player. Like those were two quotes from two different players that were on different sides of the vaccine issue, and both ended up being pro-player around pro-player choice. Mm-hmm. So my guess is, in the NBA fraternity
standpoint and that type of thing, you just
if you're in a union, like that's typically that should be always your marching orders in terms of outward message. Is that when you're a union, you can argue about things behind closed doors, but publicly you are to be in favor of the player almost no matter what, right? Like your fellow union member. As having been heavily involved in unions in the past, like that is just sort of union 101. In this case, I would say from that perspective, look, again, there was no quote from Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was quoted, but that guy, look, he's really respected, but he's not a current player. And so my guess is among the current players, there's probably the same thing where it's, hey, I don't, maybe I wish that we were going at this full strength, but I'd be like really shocked on a personal level if there was any strain behind it, because I just don't think that's how these guys operate. I think on a personal level, it appears, at least publicly, that they all really respect each other, knowing that they sort of all have differences and little peccadillos of their own, and they're just all kind of different guys. But in the end, NBA does seem the NBA player fraternity now is very strong among its group. There's actually not really anything in the way of rivalry when it comes to players at this point. There's media created things around who is where on sort of hierarchies, but when it comes to actually players supporting other players, I challenge you to find a time in NBA history when it's been more closely knit across the entire league. There's like, can you think of players that dislike other players on at least on a star level? Like, they all seem to really like each other. And so I don't,
even the ones,
I don't,
even a place like 76ers where they maybe don't like Ben Simmons, but they all wanted to go talk to him. Ben Simmons might be the only star that doesn't like other players in the league right now.
And that's like, I wouldn't even call it a rivalry, because they just kind of want them to be back on their team. So it's a one player thing, and that's not a rivalry. So I guess from that standpoint, I guess what I mean is, without trying to guess on an individual level of where these guys land on the Kyrie Irving issue, I've really rarely heard, I guess I take it back. Enes Kanter was quoted in this article, and he's a current NBA player. So I mea culpa there. There was one NBA player quoted as sort of being the center and maybe against the rest of their group. Otherwise, this is a fraternity of guys, I think, that sort of all understand each other on a personal level and do seem to be sort of like pro do whatever you got to do for yourself kind of camp. And I'd be shocked if it kind of went further than that.
Yeah, and the Cantor piece of saying the sentiment was generally along the lines of, especially if you're looking to try to win a championship, so that narrative can play a little bit, right? You're here to win games, and any personal opinions you may have around it. I think that my overarching thing would almost be like, it's like Doug and I don't agree on everything. You know, there's plenty of things that you and I talk about, whether it's this dumbest thing, something sports related, or whatever, a personal life choice, whatever the case may be. I never come out of one of those conversations going, well, that's probably it. I mean, Doug doesn't agree with me, so chances are I can never talk to him again, or chances are I need to really judge him harshly, or I need to separate myself from him, or I'm going to think that he's preventing me from doing something. So I mean, that's just from maybe a human friendship, personal standpoint, right? Like, if you're any type of reasonable individual, you don't take the fact that if someone doesn't lockstep with me, I'm automatically going to change my opinion on them. That obviously is a removed piece from the players union, and like you said, public representation of how you carry the narrative around the players and what they're about, and keeping certain things behind closed doors. So it is interesting, right? At least from that standpoint, regardless of what the topic or issue may be. I'll put it in simpler terms quickly. If when James Harden came in and Kyrie said he wanted to stay the point guard, I want to be the point guard, right? Like, or vice versa. There was a difficulty there between what role is each player going to have. That wouldn't break everything down. It would be, how do we navigate these roles on the court so we can have the best team possible? It's not going to be this shutdown attitude of, if you don't agree with my perspective on how we're going to do things on the court, there's no chance for me to be able to play with you.
Well, right, because if you take a heavy, that's the other thing too. If you take a heavy stand as a player against another player at this point, it's so net negative in terms of just your overall trajectory, because you're going to have to play with this guy at some point, you presume. So going against it now would make 0.0 sense, right? Like, being mad about it now would accomplish almost nothing. It's actually a thing that sometimes people don't understand about just general psyche things. Like, getting mad at someone almost never works from a strategic standpoint of like getting something accomplished, even if it's something you dislike. Getting mad and angry in the moment, or taking it personally like it's against you, something that happens a lot these days. If you think it's a personal affront to you, you've already sort of started losing the battle in terms of having a good emotional response to it. And I actually just don't think that's how a lot of these guys operate. I think from a team sport point of view, operating opposite and sort of being okay with a lot of things that come along is how you maintain being in a team sport for a long time. Being super, being very negative or being anti another person, it's just not going to pay dividends for you. And I think a lot of these guys do sort of seem to understand it, even if the choice is not something that they would make. Okay, we're going to finish this off as we prep up for media day here. First, talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. You know, when this stuff comes around the Nori household. People are running for it. Even other family members, like sort of the tangential family members, they see the box hanging around. They want to try it. Then they end up kind of pocketing a bar or two. All of a sudden, the Built Bar jar is run a little dry. That's because this stuff tastes great. It's a protein bar unlike you've really ever had before. If you tried other flavors, you know, it's kind of spongy, cardboardy. They kind of left taste as being the 17th thing they thought about. Not Built Bar, coconut, cherry barcia, raspberry, German chocolate, cookies and cream, just some of the flavors that you get at Built Bar. You get the stats too, 17 to 18 grams of protein, calories ranging from 130 to 180, 4 to 5 grams of sugar. That's a sweet spot, folks. 4 to 5 grams of net carbs, amazing flavors, all tasty, super healthy. Go to built.com, use the promo code locked on, and you get 15% off your order. Promo code locked on, just like our podcast network, for 15% off at built.com.
So, of course, for the time being, we'll put a pin in this. Maybe we'll get more insights and information at the media day. All we can do is wait and see how things unfold here over the course of training camp. But specific now to media day, let's say beyond this particular topic, which will obviously be at the forefront of it. But what else are you hoping to get out of media day tomorrow when there's some access to the players to hear how the off season is gone, and specifically maybe talking around LMA coming back, right? Paul Millsap joining this team, Patty Mills. Like, I think some of the new players become as interesting to hear from as any of the stars because they're the new guys in the fold and thinking about how they're going to fit together on this team.
Yeah, I'm not sure actually if they have access to everybody tomorrow, so I'll
It's
have to
some,
see.
yeah.
I think it's some and not all, and I should look at that release again about what it is. Look, these media days, they are what they are. It's a lot of talking points. It's mostly fluff. It's no reporter's fault. They ask all the right questions. It's just like, what are you going to say? You're not going to say, hey, 500 should be good enough, and we'll hopefully get to Jamaica at the end of the season. Like, that's just not how it's going to get answered. You're going to hear put in a lot of work in the offseason. We have one goal in mind. It's the championship. We want to come in as a team. A lot of new people. I mean, I'm just guessing, but this is, a lot of new faces around here. See how a lot of it fits together. Deep team now, really excited. A lot of talent, a lot of veterans. Like, you're going to probably hear some version of that from just around everybody.
Do you think that if any of the new players are available for conversations or questions, do you think any of them will say, I don't love the fit here. I think it may have been a mistake. I anticipate a bit of a disaster. Is that possible?
Oh, what a mistake I made. Holy cow. I just didn't think Barclays looked better as a visiting player. I don't I don't know. No,
I was
you're not
confused about location. I thought this was West Coast. I'm completely thrown off.
This is just what it is. Look, it's interesting to get the guy. It's exciting because these guys are getting back into the room. We know the season is coming down the pike. It means games are starting soon. That part's really exciting. Rarely do you learn anything new. A lot of these guys are really seasoned when it comes to reporters at this point. They're not going to take bait on certain questions. We saw that with Marks and Nash. Like, you're not going to just, especially on a media day kind of thing. Like, you're not going to get enough time with them to sort of, lull them into sort of a false sense of security, so they say something wrong. It's just not that. These dudes are super trained. They know how.
Oh my God! Oh
Yeah,
exactly. God, guys.
Exactly. They just know. They know what to do. But it's what it makes it super, just a regular kind of thing. So I don't think there's going to be any bombshells. Look, if Kyrie doesn't show up and there's kind of stuff around that, then maybe we have a story and we sort of start the season sort of around where we were last year, where it was calling the media pawns and stuff like that. And it became, and guess what? I brought it back up, but that kind of just disappeared too. This is what I mean about a lot of these
prawns.
Prawns?
Like
yeah, delicious.
That completely changes my opinion on that.
Completely underrated restaurant order though, by the way, prawns. Just people don't go to it a lot, but man, they're big. They're juicy. They're just like, shrimp, shrimp on steroids, basically. So anyway, no, you're not going to get any of this stuff. And I'm just really not expecting much. And I'll listen to every single interview because every once in a while you get a nugget to take away, but typically not.
No, and a lot of this stuff I think is just, it'll be nice to get some of the new guys in front of the fan base and, get to see them. And listen, I'll enjoy hearing Patty Mills talk about why he's excited to be here and why Paul Millsap chose to come to Brooklyn over some of the other options that he had, because there were definitely suitors for both those players. Like the LMA piece is certainly one where you feel like, we talked about it a couple episodes ago, this is a guy that felt comfortable with Brooklyn, was going to be there, had to retire, gets to come back. We assumed he'd come back to Brooklyn. But Millsap and Mills, they had opportunities to go other places. So maybe we just get a little bit more insight around that, although we've certainly heard from them before. And I think what it really sets the table up for the rest of the week for us, getting into, they're out in the West Coast, training camp, San Diego, preseason just around the corner. This is where you and I will start to think about where can some of these guys fit in? What about the back end of the roster? Like that's some of the little things that this is like the little teaser before you actually get into some of the juicier stuff. And I'll even tease to you, Doug. I'm still trying to find a way to get Nicholas Claxton some real minutes. So I'm working on that too. I got a lot of things going on. So media day will be interesting. But stick around for the podcast the rest of the week because I got some things working in the old noodle. This prawn's been cooking.
Oh, and I'm going to bring up. I already put in a bet on the Nets for this season. So we'll get into what that bet's going to be later in this. I want later in this week. Again, like thanks for making us the first listen for on the podcast each week. Love that we're going to be starting to do this 5 days a week again. Starting Monday, today's the day we're going to be going 5 days a week every single week on the Locked On Nets channel. One other thing to make Nets fans feel pretty good about this whole Kyrie kerfuffle, as it were, is where it. And if you think that the season is at risk, or if oh my gosh, you're starting on a bad foot, you know who doesn't think it's at risk? Bettors, because even off this news for a full 72 hours for everyone to digest it, the Nets championship odds did not move at all. Plus 225 on our friends over at Bet Online. That's exactly where it was when we left off last week. No movement at all. People who actually put their money where their mouth is when it comes to that have not moved that line even an inch. And the over under 56.5 wins has not moved either. Actually, it looks like it's about to go up to 57 the way the betting is going. So just in case everyone was ready to start jumping off the proverbial ledge because, the Nets are taking a hit to start the season. Like I said, people that actually do this for a living don't seem to care at all. So that's where we're landing. Hey, I didn't mention at the beginning, but make sure you subscribe over on YouTube. All of our episodes are going up on YouTube the same time that our podcast episode drops. Have a bunch of subscribers already going over there. People jumping into the comments. We respond to every single comment. If you have a comment or question, make sure you throw it into a video, because Adam and I are in there every single day. And we really appreciate the numbers that we've seen over there. So make sure you're subscribing on YouTube. The link will be in the show notes.
And don't forget, friends, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. John Templeton.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.